Long story short, they came in, had us escorted off the property, was going to take over the business. In 3 days, we had the ability to go back in. We borrowed a bunch of money from Charity's dad to pay a lawyer, go in and basically force them out of the business, turn it into a simple loan. But
He won the highest honor in the entire custom car world. His shop was busier than it had ever been. His show sat at the very top of its network. And then, with no warning, his fans could see that Dave Kindig walked away from all of it. People assumed money had dried up. People assumed something dark was hiding behind those big bay doors.
from when we did Bitchin Rides, he's a great friend. We've watched these guys all grow up, get married, have kids, and we worked for 12 and a half years together. So they're really a part of the team.
Almost nobody guessed the real reason was sitting in a boardroom 2,000 miles away from his garage. The goodbye that refused to look like defeat. In November of the year 2024, Dave Kindig posted the kind of message you read twice because your brain refuses to accept it the first time. After 11 seasons and more than 150 episodes, Bitchin Rides was over. He called it an incredible run and thanked the people who had ridden along for 10 years. And he meant it, every gentle word, which honestly is what made it so hard to swallow. When a beloved show gets canceled, we go digging for the heartbreak underneath it. With Dave, you could dig all day and come up with nothing. Then he dropped the detail that turned confusion into something closer to disbelief. The final season would premiere on the 12th of March in 2025, months after he had already told the world it was over. If you want to understand what Bitchin Rides was actually about, forget the television for a minute and look at a single car that almost never appeared on it in the way you would expect. The build was a 1953 Corvette body, and the team called it the 12 Air. It did not come together in a weekend, or a season, or even a year. It took 4.5 years of work, and a good chunk of that happened straight through the worst of the pandemic, when the rest of the world had stopped moving. Dave has said on camera that for 25 years he had wanted to compete at the highest level of the custom world. But he refused to show up unless he believed he could actually win. That is a different kind of pride than most people carry. It is the kind that would rather stay home than be embarrassed. So they checked every box they could think of. The entire car was hand-fabricated out of flat sheets of aluminium, shaped into a single-piece body with almost no separations anywhere on it. There is nothing on that car, Dave will tell you, that was not built by human hands in that shop. Under the hood sits a 9.2-liter V12, an engine capable of 1,000 horsepower, deliberately calmed down to around 650 so it would behave like a car a person could actually own and drive. That Corvette went to the Detroit Autorama and won the Don Riddler Memorial Award. The win happened at the 2024 Autorama, and the Riddler is named after a man named Don Riddler, not the comic book villain people keep typing. It is widely considered the single most prestigious prize in the entire custom car universe, handed to the one vehicle that best marries design, engineering, and pure craftsmanship. That is the part that still gives me chills. Dave earned the highest honor in custom car building just as his show was ending. A top-rated series, an award-winning shop, and a man who still loved creating cars all walked away at once. It did not look like retirement. It looked like a decision forced by something beyond the garage doors. The truth was waiting in a building Dave never set foot in a meeting he was never invited to. The merger that quietly pulled the plug. In the year 2022, two media empires combined into a single enormous company that would later be known as Warner Brothers Discovery. That new company suddenly owned a sprawling collection of brands and channels. And like every giant after a merger, it went hunting for places to cut money. One of the first things to go was the small streaming home where shows like Bitchin Rides lived, a niche app built specifically for car people. That little service never had the audience numbers of the company's giant mainstream platforms. And to the executives staring at spreadsheets, a separate app just for gearheads stopped making financial sense. So they shut it down and folded those shows into bigger services. The shows survived the move, but they did not survive it whole. The budgets came down with them. Dave has been open about what that felt like from his side of it. He never got a personal phone call explaining any of it. He learned about the big changes the way the rest of us learn about corporate decisions, through announcements written for shareholders, not for the people who actually built the thing. When his own production contract came up for renewal, the new terms were simply worse. The network wanted the same Kindig quality, the same jaw-dropping reveals, for less money than before. So Dave sat down with Charity, his wife, and the financial backbone of the whole operation. And they ran the numbers the way they have run every number for 25 years, accepting that a smaller budget would force them into choices they had spent their lives refusing. They would have to rush builds. They would have to cut corners on fabrication to hit shorter filming schedules. And to a man whose entire reputation is built on never cutting a corner, that was a non-starter. So he made a counter-offer that nobody at the network expected. "Let the show end clean and proud," he said, rather than let it slowly bleed out at half its quality. The network agreed. He has been clear in interviews that none of it was personal. It was math. A show that had been the crown jewel of its network had become a line item that no longer fits somebody else's balance sheet, and he refused to let that math damage the cars. He walked away owning every build, every design, and every tool in the place. But here is what I keep coming back to. A man does not protect his independence that fiercely unless he has already learned, the hard way, what happens when he gives it up. And Dave learned that lesson long before any camera ever pointed at him. The day strangers changed the locks on his own shop. Dave has told this story himself, in his own voice, and the calm way he tells it now hides how terrifying it was to live through. Long story short, he says, they came in, had him escorted off the property, and were going to take over the business. In 3 days, he got the ability to go back in. They borrowed a bunch of money from Charity's dad to pay a lawyer, went in, and forced the people out. Let me fill in what that flat summary leaves out, because the details are the kind that keep a person up at night. A husband and wife, car collectors who liked what Dave was doing, had come through the front door months earlier looking like a gift. They offered a 6-figure investment in cash. Dave and Charity had no formal business education and had never taken outside money in their lives. The wife, who handled accounting as her profession, offered to manage the shop's books. It looked like a favor. It was reconnaissance. Within about 4 months, she knew every number that mattered. The margins, the assets, the real value of the brand Dave had spent years quietly building. Then they struck. Dave was walking out to grab lunch when the security team arrived. The locks were changed before he could finish a sentence. The phones on the shop floor went dead. The company vehicle got towed away. Within an hour, Dave and his entire crew had been physically marched off the property they had built with their own 2 hands. And to justify the takeover, the investors accused him of a felony, claiming he had embezzled tens of thousands of dollars. Money, Dave has said publicly, was never even in the account. Their plan was to push the founder out and turn his shop into a completely different kind of restoration business. But Dave did the one thing those investors never planned for. He fought. Charity called her father, and her father loaned them the money for a lawyer. That attorney moved fast, and within 3 days, the Kindigs walked back onto their own property holding a court order. The investor couple was forced out of every role they had grabbed. The 6-figure stake got rewritten from ownership into a simple loan with normal interest. A court order was issued, keeping those 2 people hundreds of yards away from the shop for good. The false accusation evaporated without a single charge ever sticking. Dave will tell you now that he is almost grateful it happened, and I think that is one of the most honest things he has ever said. That brutal stretch taught him that a handshake is worthless without a contract. It taught him to set money aside for taxes before he spent a dime on toys. It taught him to never spend what he had not yet earned. Those lessons got welded into the foundation of his company, and years later, they got welded into the television contracts that protected him when the corporate world came knocking. So when you hear that he walked away from the show owning every tool and every design, understand that this is not an accident. It is a man who was robbed once and swore it would never happen again. That iron grip on his contracts mattered even more once you learn how heavy the cameras really were. the hidden weight of a camera that never left. There is a version of this story where television is the hero, the thing that lifted a small Utah garage to global fame. That version is true, but there is a quieter version underneath it that the show itself never aired, and it explains a lot about why letting go felt like relief instead of loss. When Bitchin rides first started, the filming felt manageable. A crew would show up at the big facility and simply record whatever was already happening. Dave told them to fade into the background, and by his own estimate, he spent maybe 45 minutes a week actually talking to a camera. The rest was meant to be raw documentation of real work. That was the dream. The reality of television production does not work that gently. The crew could be quiet, but the calendar was not. A serious custom build can take somewhere around 4,000 to 5,000 hours to finish, which is the equivalent of 2 full years of labor for a single fabricator pouring himself into one machine. Now, put a television order on top of that. When a network asks for a stack of episodes every season, and every single episode has to end with a finished, gleaming car rolling out for the reveal, the math turns cruel in a hurry. Builds that Dave would happily have let simmer for months suddenly had hard deadlines stapled to them.
I'm doing a little bit of YouTube stuff right now. We're just starting. I've got my producer, Nick Maher, from when we did Bitchin Rides. He's a great friend. We've watched these guys all grow up.
The cameras would leave on a Friday and return on a Monday, and the shop had to show real progress every single week, whether the work was ready to be rushed or not. That pressure showed up in ways the audience never saw on screen. Former members of the crew have described moments where safety itself got squeezed because somebody was hurrying to beat a filming clock. The specifics stay sealed behind agreements, but the pattern repeats across the accounts of people who were in that building. The show needed cars finished. The shop needed to build them right. Those two needs did not always shake hands. So when he says that losing the show handed him back something he had not had in years, he means time. The freedom to chase a longer, weirder, more ambitious project without a production clock breathing down his neck. He had spent years negotiating his contracts carefully, specifically so his shop never became a permanent film set that slowly compromised the craftsmanship he had given his whole life to protect. The cameras took time away from him. His contracts were built to give it back. And when that final goodbye came, he turned to the one person who had been holding the entire thing together since long before any of it began. The partner who saved it all before the world was watching. Every story like this has someone standing slightly out of frame, doing the work that keeps the hero standing. And in this story, that person has a name and a title and 35 years of receipts. Dave Kindig met Dave in a dance club back in the late 1980s, and the two of them married on the 7th of April in 1990. It is tempting to call her a supportive spouse and move on, but that phrase would insult everything she actually did. She was a co-founder in every real sense of the word. When Dave walked away from his steady dealership paycheck in 1999, just 6 weeks after their son Drew was born, Charity did not try to talk him off the ledge. She jumped off it with him. She took over the books, the marketing, and the difficult clients, and she raised 2 children while the business clawed its way up out of a home garage with nothing but reputation as fuel. Dave has a line he likes to use about the two of them. He is the go, the restless engine that never stops dreaming up the next impossible build. And she is the whoa, the steady hand on the wheel, keeping all that energy from driving them off a cliff. And when those investors changed the locks and marched him off the property, Charity did not fall apart. She called her father. She borrowed the money. She sat across the table from the lawyers while her husband stood outside a shop he was not allowed to enter. That 3-day war that saved the company was every bit her victory, as it was his. And the moment it was over, she went straight back to the books and made certain that nobody would ever again get their hands on the company's finances without her watching. Today, she serves as the vice president and chief financial officer of the business. Their daughter Bailey runs the marketing side. Their son Drew, the baby whose birth started this whole leap of faith, works as a body man on the shop floor. So when the corporate world finally pulled the plug on the show, Dave did not rage. He thanked the network, walked across his own shop floor, and hugged the woman who had been there before the cameras and would be there long after they left. And then, instead of fading away the way the executives probably expected, the two of them made a move that flipped the entire story on its head. The comeback that belonged to them alone. When Bitchin' Rides wrapped, the fans did not quietly drift away to find another show. They wanted more, and for once, a creator actually handed them exactly that, on his own terms, with no one sitting in the middle deciding what they were allowed to see. In early 2026, the shop leaned all the way into its own YouTube channel with a series built around total access, settling into a steady rhythm of fresh episodes on Wednesdays and Saturdays. And the format is the entire point. Where television gave you the polished, time-boxed, perfectly trimmed version of a build, this new format gives you the raw and real thing. The early design arguments stay in. The metal shaping stays in. The wiring, the dyno pulls, the final obsessive detailing, and yes, the frustrations of chasing a kind of perfection that fights back. All of it stays in instead of getting edited out for time. This is the exact access fans had been quietly begging for across a decade of watching, and it is precisely the access the old network format could never allow. The episodes run longer. They dig deeper into the actual craft. You get to truly know the team, the humor of longtime fabricator Kevin Sheely, the family rhythm, the specialized skills that make each car what it becomes. The shop kept right on rolling through all of it. The flagship carbon fiber project kept advancing. Wild Customs kept rolling out the bay doors. The team kept showing up at the biggest industry showcases with reveals that dropped jaws, including wide-body muscle cars and bold new concepts that have no real precedent to copy from. And the funniest twist of all, the one nobody at that boardroom could have scripted, is that taking the cameras away seems to have made the work better. Without a production crew underfoot all day, the team finally had room to breathe, to experiment, to chase a perfect finish, to wrestle genuinely hard engineering, instead of racing a clock that belonged to somebody else. The truth that fans had always suspected turned out to be exactly right. The heart of this thing was never the television show. It was the craftsmanship, the problem-solving, and the family inside that building. The network closed one door, and Dave Kindig, a man who learned long ago to never again let strangers hold the keys, simply walked through one of his own. The ride was never over. It just changed lanes. So I want to hear from you on this one. Do you think losing Bitchin' Rides was the worst thing that ever happened to Dave Kindig, or the best thing in disguise? Drop your honest take in the comments.